Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people, despite knowing your worth? Imagine boarding a transcontinental flight after a long week, holding a first-class ticket you earned through years of dedication, only to be ignored, dismissed, and humiliated by the very person tasked with serving you. How would it feel if every polite request was met with disdain? Every glance passed over as if you didn't exist. Dr. Naomi Ellis, a brilliant black CEO, faced exactly that, a calculated erasure by a flight attendant who refused to acknowledge her presence. The plane soared at 35,000 feet, yet Naomi's world shrank into a bubble of deliberate neglect. Would you stay silent, swallow the insult, and pretend it never happened? Or would you stand up, confront injustice, and risk turning the situation upside down? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine being in her seat, the eyes of fellow passengers subtly watching, the power of your choices pressing on you. Could you find the calm, the courage, and the strategy to reclaim not just your dignity, but the integrity of the system itself? This story isn't just about a flight, it's about courage, accountability, and the quiet force of principled action. Stick with us, feel every moment, and witness how one person's resolve can change everything. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to experience the full journey. The morning air outside Seattle-Tacoma International was a mixture of mist and jet fuel that clean, sharp scent that always reminded Dr. Naomi Ellis she was going somewhere that mattered. She moved through the terminal with quiet confidence, no entourage, no designer handbag, just a navy coat, a worn leather portfolio, and the calm presence of someone who'd learned long ago that power didn't need to be loud. Her assistant had begged to come along. Naomi had smiled. "It's only a short flight to Boston. I'll be fine." She always said that. She'd been saying it her whole life to teachers who doubted her, to investors who interrupted her, and sometimes to herself. Today, she wasn't just another passenger. She was the keynote speaker at the National Health Equity Summit, where she'd unveil Vitalis Biotech's newest project, an AI diagnostic system designed for underfunded rural clinics across America. Her message was simple. Healthcare should treat everyone with the same dignity. But she didn't yet know that, in a few hours, that same dignity would be tested 34,000 feet in the air. At Gate C-14, the boarding line for Blue Star Air Flight 287 began to form. Business travelers scrolled on phones. A couple took selfies near the window. Naomi stepped aside, waiting until her row was called 2A, First Class. A gate agent scanned her ticket and smiled briefly. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Ellis." Her name flashed on the monitor, correctly printed, perfectly valid. Everything looked ordinary. But as Naomi entered the cabin, she noticed the first shift in atmosphere. The lights were soft and golden, seats arranged in neat rows of luxury, and then the look. A woman in a crisp navy uniform, silver hair tucked under her cap, eyes cold as marble, Claudia Reeves, lead flight attendant. The badge on her chest gleamed with 3 decades of service. Naomi smiled, the kind of smile meant to dissolve tension before it begins. "Good morning." Claudia didn't answer. She moved aside mechanically, as if Naomi's presence had briefly disrupted her choreography. It lasted only a second. But Naomi felt it, that familiar flicker. The one she'd felt in boardrooms, restaurants, hotel lobbies. The flicker that said, "You don't belong here." She walked to her seat, 2A, window side, and placed her coat neatly on the armrest. Outside, A ground crewman gestured to a row of luggage carts. The engines hummed low, like the slow inhale before a storm. A young attendant with olive skin and kind eyes approached. "Good morning, ma'am. Would you like some water before takeoff?" Naomi nodded. "Just a glass, please. Thank you." The girl smiled, quick and genuine. Her name tag read Maya Sanchez. As Maya walked away, Naomi noticed Claudia whisper something to her, a short exchange, sharp and clipped. Maya's expression faltered. She hesitated, then turned back with an apologetic look. Naomi waved it off with a small smile, though inside something tightened. The plane filled quickly. A man in seat 2B, mid-40s, white shirt, reading the Wall Street Journal, gave her a polite nod. A couple across the aisle adjusted their noise-canceling headphones. The soft chime of the seatbelt sign echoed through the cabin. Naomi leaned back. She loved takeoff that moment. The world tilted and gravity loosened its grip. For her, it always felt like freedom. But freedom, she knew, was a fragile thing. She glanced at the reflection in the window, her own calm face framed by clouds beyond. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, words from years ago, when Naomi was still a girl watching her mother get ignored at a grocery counter. "Some folks will pretend they don't see you. Baby, don't you ever help them succeed at it." Naomi had promised she wouldn't. The cabin grew quiet as the plane climbed higher. A few minutes later, the service began. The aroma of brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with butter and toasted bread. Claudia pushed the service cart slowly down the aisle, her smile rehearsed for every passenger except Naomi. She stopped at 1A. "Good morning, Mr. Rowe, your usual espresso. At 1C, Mrs. Daniels, still sparkling water, no ice." Then she rolled past 2A without a glance. Naomi waited, watching the cart move by again as Claudia served 2B, then the aisle across. Maybe it was an oversight, she thought. Maybe not. Either way, she wouldn't jump to conclusions. She pressed the call button once, a soft chime. Nothing happened. Maya noticed from the galley and stepped forward, but Claudia blocked her path with a subtle shake of her head. Naomi felt the air shift again, the subtle cruelty of silence. She opened her laptop, trying to focus on her notes for the summit graphs, outcomes, equity metrics, numbers that proved fairness could be measured, if only fairness were actually practiced. 15 minutes passed. Claudia walked by again. Naomi's cup holder remained empty. She pressed the button a second time. This time, Claudia stopped, turned halfway, and said flatly, "Ma'am, please be patient. We're serving our primary guests first." Naomi blinked. Primary guests. Claudia's lips curled into something resembling a smile. Sometimes upgrades happen by mistake. It's okay. The words landed softly but carried the weight of centuries. Naomi felt the burn rise behind her chest, but her voice stayed calm. "Understood," she said quietly, and she looked away out into the endless white of clouds. For a long moment, Naomi just breathed. The engines droned like a heartbeat, steady and indifferent. She thought of her upcoming speech, the line she'd written in bold at the end of her notes. Equality isn't about access, it's about acknowledgement. And she thought, bitterly, how strange to be tested on your own words at 34,000 feet. Her fingers brushed the edge of the armrest, where a faint engraving read "Blue Star, First Class, inspired by excellence." Naomi almost laughed. Excellence, she thought, should begin with respect. Outside the window, the sky looked infinite. Inside the cabin, It felt smaller by the minute, and in that stillness where dignity met insult, Naomi Ellis made a decision, not one of anger, but of clarity. She would not let this moment pass quietly, not this time. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft leveled at cruising altitude. Naomi adjusted her seat, the leather smooth and cool beneath her fingertips. Around her, the hush of first class settled a rhythm of soft conversation, clicking cutlery, and the hum of engines. It was the kind of quiet that usually soothed her, a floating cocoon above the clouds, but this time the silence carried edges. Claudia Reeves moved down the aisle like a conductor guiding an orchestra, her every gesture precise. She smiled at a man in a tailored suit, laughed lightly at a joke from the couple across the aisle, and leaned in just enough to make them feel important. Yet, every time her path neared seat 2A, her eyes seemed to slide right past it, as if that particular square of air did not exist. Naomi noticed. So did Maya Sanchez. The younger attendant hesitated more than once, tray in hand, before catching Claudia's warning glance, a small tilt of the head that meant, "Don't." Naomi had built her life around noticing patterns. It was her gift, her profession. She saw them in medical data, in social systems, in the ways opportunity spread or didn't. And now, in this narrow aisle suspended above the world, she saw another pattern forming, subtle omissions, little pauses, smiles rationed like privilege. She reached for her tablet to distract herself, but the screen reflected her own face, calm, composed, slightly tired, a woman who had learned to live with small injuries no one else could see. The scent of coffee drifted by. Claudia's voice, crisp and practiced, floated with it. "Would you like a refill, Mr. Wallace?" Naomi turned her head slightly. The man beside her, Greg Wallace, smiled politely, holding out his cup. "Thank you. That'd be great." Claudia poured, laughing softly at something he said about turbulence. Naomi waited, expecting the same question to follow. It didn't. Claudia pushed the cart forward without a glance in her direction. A flicker of irritation rose inside Naomi, brief but sharp. She took a breath, steadying herself. She had faced senators who dismissed her ideas, investors who questioned her leadership, and boardrooms where her authority was treated like a borrowed coat. But something about being ignored in a space this small, this inescapable, pressed harder than any of that. Maya passed quietly with a tray of pastries. She slowed near Naomi's seat, then lowered her voice. "Dr. Ellis, would you like something to drink?" Naomi smiled at her kindness. "Green tea, if you have it." Maya nodded, a flicker of guilt crossing her face before she turned toward the galley. Claudia's voice cut across the aisle, cool and firm. "Maya, service protocol row order, please. Yes, Ms. Reeves," Maya said softly. The young attendant's steps faltered. Naomi caught the small tremor in her hands as she rearranged the cups on her tray, returning empty-handed. Naomi met her eyes and whispered, "It's all right." Maya's lips pressed into a line. She nodded, barely. The hum of the aircraft filled the silence again. Outside the window, clouds stretched like white oceans, endlessly calm. Naomi watched them drift by, her reflection superimposed on the glass. She thought about her morning meeting before the flight, the one where she'd spoken to a group of interns at Vitalis. Dignity, she had told them, isn't given. It's upheld by action, by courage, and sometimes by silence. Now she wondered which one this moment demanded. She decided to wait. Just a little longer, the flight continued smoothly. Breakfast trays clinked, napkins rustled. At 37,000 feet, the world looked peaceful. But Naomi knew better than to trust appearances. Her thoughts drifted to the speech she would give tomorrow in Boston. It was meant to launch her company's Access for All initiative, a partnership with rural hospitals. Her words would emphasize compassion, the invisible thread connecting innovation and humanity. She had written the closing line days ago. Late at night, progress isn't just about technology, it's about how we treat each other when no one is watching. And yet, here she was, watched by dozens of eyes that pretended not to see. A light jolt shook the cabin. Claudia steadied herself, smiling down at a passenger. Just a small bump. Folks. Then she turned toward Naomi's row again, her tone bright and clipped. Coffee. Mr. Wallace Gregg nodded, accepting the refill. Appreciate it. Claudia looked past Naomi once more, pretending to adjust something on the cart. Naomi leaned forward slightly. Excuse me, may I have some tea? Please. Claudia didn't answer immediately. Her hand froze mid-air. The sound of liquid pouring stopped. Then she turned, a perfect mask of courtesy. I'll see what we can do, ma'am. She pushed the cart away. Gregg frowned faintly. That was odd, he murmured under his breath. Naomi gave a small and controlled smile. I've seen odder. She folded her hands in her lap, feeling the low thrum of the engine beneath her feet. Her heartbeat matched its rhythm, steady, controlled, patient. 15 minutes passed. Claudia returned with the empty tray cart. Not a single cup in sight. Naomi pressed the call button once more. The chime sounded soft, polite, impossible to ignore. Claudia's shoulders stiffened. She turned slowly, her smile tight. Yes. Ma'am, I've been waiting for tea, Naomi said, voice calm but firm. Claudia exhaled through her nose, as if holding back irritation. You'll have to wait your turn. Ma'am, we're serving our primary guests first. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Primary guests. Claudia gave a light shrug, her tone almost condescending. Sometimes the system upgrades passengers by mistake. It happens. Naomi looked at her squarely. And sometimes people assume mistakes where none exist. A few heads turned. Gregg's brows rose. The couple across the aisle exchanged glances. Claudia forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Enjoy your flight, ma'am. She turned, walking briskly toward the galley. Maya lingered nearby, pretending to adjust the curtain. Naomi caught her whisper. I'm sorry. I can make the tea after service if you'd like. Naomi's tone was gentle. Don't apologize for kindness. Maya's eyes glistened, but she nodded, retreating down the aisle. Naomi sat back, the tension spreading through her shoulders. The insult itself was minor a cup of tea withheld, a look, a phrase. But small things like that didn't stay small. They grew in the silence that followed them. Her phone rested face down on the tray table. She thought of calling her assistant, of reporting it to the airline immediately, but something stopped her. She wanted to see what pattern would emerge next, to let the truth reveal itself fully. Across the aisle, Gregg pretended to read but kept glancing her way. His journalist's instinct had caught the scent of a story. Naomi sensed it too. Only she wasn't chasing headlines. She was chasing something older: justice, respect, a balance that still tilted the wrong way. She folded her napkin carefully, aligning the edges. Her motions were deliberate, steady, almost ceremonial. If she couldn't control the world around her, she could at least control this moment. this breath. Outside, the sky deepened to a richer blue. The sunlight angled through the windows, painting her hands gold. She traced the rim of her untouched cup holder, feeling the quiet ache of being unseen. In her chest, calm gathered like gravity, dense, unshakable. She wasn't angry yet, not quite, but she was done being invisible. The air in the cabin grew heavier as the hours stretched on. The sun, now higher above the clouds, poured through the windows in muted gold. Naomi Ellis sat perfectly still, her posture upright but relaxed, as if carved from calm. Inside, however, a quiet storm was forming. Her tea never came, not once, not even a glass of water. She had been ignored long enough to recognize that it wasn't forgetfulness, it was intent, polished and disguised as procedure. Across from her, Greg Wallace closed his laptop and looked sideways, his brow creased slightly. "Are they ever going to serve you?" he whispered. Naomi smiled faintly, not turning her head. "I'm curious to see how long it takes," she said softly. Her voice was steady, deliberate, the kind that drew attention without effort. Greg gave a slow nod, understanding that what was happening wasn't about service anymore. It was about visibility. Claudia Reeves reappeared, gliding through the aisle with a tray of desserts. Her tone, sweet and hollow, filled the air. Would anyone care for a chocolate mousse or fruit tart? She stopped by each seat, offering the choices, praising the pastry chef, laughing at trivial comments. When she reached Naomi's row, she skipped over 2A again with surgical precision. Naomi followed her movements quietly, eyes calm but unblinking. Then, softly, she pressed the call button. The small chime rang out once, crisp and clear. Claudia froze, tray balanced on her palm. "Yes," the word came out clipped, thinly veiled irritation behind the smile. Naomi lifted her gaze. "Could I please have a cup of green tea?" Claudia tilted her head. "As I said earlier, ma'am, we're prioritizing our primary guests." "Primary," Naomi repeated gently. "Is that a class of service or a matter of judgment?" Claudia's face stiffened. "Excuse me, you heard me." Naomi's tone was calm, her words precise. "I'd just like to understand how you decide who's primary." For a second, silence filled the cabin. Several passengers looked up. The couple across the aisle lowered their screens. Even the hum of the engines seemed quieter. Claudia recovered with a thin smile. "We treat all our guests equally, ma'am, but sometimes upgrades happen, and sometimes passengers expect a bit too much." Naomi leaned forward slightly, her eyes steady. "Respect isn't an upgrade, it's standard." The words landed like glass shattering on marble, soft, but unmistakable. Claudia's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to lower your tone." Naomi tilted her head, eyes unwavering. "You've mistaken calm for compliance. Don't." The older attendant drew in a slow breath, her composure fracturing just a little. She forced a thin smile and moved away. Greg exhaled beside her, voice low. That was something. Naomi didn't answer. She was thinking, calculating. Not revenge, not confrontation for its own sake, something larger. She'd spent her life navigating quiet power, but this wasn't a boardroom. It was a flying symbol of hierarchy wrapped in polite service. From the galley, she could hear murmurs. Claudia's voice, sharp and whispering, drifted faintly. "She's going to be trouble." Naomi closed her eyes, centering herself. She could almost hear her mother again, steady and proud. "Don't let them make you small." Minutes later, Maya Sanchez appeared at her side, her face pale but determined. "Dr. Ellis," she whispered, glancing around. Just wanted to say I'm sorry. This isn't right. I can get you tea now." Naomi looked at her kindly. "You don't need to risk your job for a cup of tea." "Maya, it's not just tea," Maya murmured. "It's how she treats people. It's been like this for years." Naomi studied her face, the fear, the decency. "Then tell me this," she said softly. "If it were your mother sitting here, what would you do?" Maya swallowed, her eyes glistening. "I'd do something," she whispered. "Then do it," Naomi said gently. "Not for me. For yourself?" The younger woman hesitated, then nodded and disappeared down the aisle. Greg leaned over, whispering, "You really think she'll act?" Naomi smiled faintly. Courage has a strange way of waking up when you least expect it. A few rows behind, Claudia stood talking with another attendant, her voice low but harsh. "She's claiming discrimination now." Can you believe that Naomi heard it every word? Years in leadership had sharpened her ability to listen through walls of politeness. She reached for her phone, her fingers steady, and opened the airline's internal app. She found the option marked Report a Safety or Conduct Concern and tapped it. When the automated message prompted her to describe the situation, she didn't mention the tea. She described behavior that could compromise passenger comfort and crew performance. She chose her words carefully: professional, clinical, factual, the kind that would trigger a protocol review at headquarters. Her thumb hovered over send. For a moment, she thought of simply letting it go. Then she pressed submit. The confirmation appeared on screen. "Your report has been logged. A response will follow shortly." She placed the phone face down again, breathing evenly. Moments later, Claudia returned, arms crossed loosely, an imitation of courtesy. "Ma'am," she said, "is there a problem you'd like to address?" Naomi looked up at her. "Yes, the one you've created." The attendant's smile faltered. "If you're implying misconduct, I'll have to escalate this." "I already did," Naomi replied quietly. A flush rose on Claudia's neck. "Excuse me, I filed a report," Naomi said evenly. "It includes timestamps, witness observations, and your repeated use of the phrase primary guests." Claudia blinked, stunned. The passengers nearby exchanged glances. Naomi continued, her tone measured. "You may want to contact your supervisor before this flight lands. I imagine the company will." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Claudia straightened, her professional smile returning like a mask being reset. "Very well, ma'am. Enjoy your flight." She turned sharply and walked toward the front of the cabin. Greg let out a low whistle. "You don't waste time." "Do you?" Naomi shook her head slightly, eyes on the horizon through the window. "Justice isn't about speed, Mr. Wallace. It's about precision." He nodded, studying her expression. "You seem very calm for someone who just filed a mid-air complaint." Naomi's smile was faint, almost reflective. "Calm is how you stay in control when someone tries to make you lose it." The seatbelt sign chimed again. The captain's voice came over the speaker, smooth and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting light turbulence ahead. Please remain seated." The plane trembled gently, a shiver through metal and air. Naomi steadied her water bottle on the tray table. The motion reminded her of balance, how easily it could tip, how much it depended on steady hands. From the galley, the curtain rustled. Maya appeared again, carrying a small cup, Steam rose from it, carrying the scent of green tea. She set it down softly in front of Naomi. "Here," Maya whispered. I told her it was for another passenger. Naomi's lips curved into a genuine smile. "Thank you." As Maya turned to leave, Naomi added quietly, "And for what it's worth, you did the right thing." The young woman nodded and slipped away. Naomi lifted the cup, inhaling the faint aroma. She took a small sip. It wasn't about the tea anymore, it never was, but the warmth spread through her chest like quiet defiance. Outside, sunlight glimmered off the wings, somewhere beyond the horizon. Boston waited, unaware that this ordinary flight was already becoming something else, a slow unraveling of arrogance, one small act at a time. And Naomi Ellis, calm and composed, knew that the moment she pressed submit, she had changed the course of more than just a flight. The plane cut smoothly through the upper sky, slicing across layers of thin white cloud. The steady thrum of the engines filled the silence that followed Naomi Ellis's report. Around her, first class had gone back to its rhythm screens glowing, fingers typing, spoons clinking softly against porcelain cups. Yet beneath that surface, something subtle had changed. The air itself seemed to listen. Naomi sat still, her hands folded lightly on her lap. She had always believed in quiet power, the kind that didn't need volume to be felt. Her mind drifted back to her mother again, a nurse who used to take double shifts in a county hospital. Whenever Naomi came home, crying about some cruel remark at school, her mother would say, "There are fights you win with words, and there are fights you win with grace. Choose carefully which one today demands." Today demanded both. She sipped her tea slowly, letting the warmth linger. Across the aisle, Greg Wallace glanced at her discreetly. His journalist instincts buzzed. This was a story, but he could feel the sacredness of it too. Something in Naomi's presence discouraged intrusion. Instead, he simply watched, recording every detail in memory, her posture, her stillness, her quiet authority. A soft chime broke the hush. The intercom crackled, and Claudia Reeves's voice, smooth as glass, floated through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your lead attendant speaking. We'd like to thank you for flying Blue Star today. Our crew is here to ensure your comfort and safety throughout your journey." The irony made Naomi's lips twitch, though she said nothing. Minutes later, Claudia reappeared, her steps crisp but not as certain as before. Something about Naomi's calm had unsettled her. Power had shifted in the smallest of ways, and she could feel it. Still, she carried herself with the arrogance of someone who had rarely been held accountable. She stopped beside Naomi's row, her tone carefully composed. "Ma'am," she began, "I've spoken with the captain regarding your concern. We'll make sure your experience improves from here on." Naomi looked up. "I'm sure you will," she said softly. Claudia hesitated, then added, "Of course, I hope we can move past this misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," Naomi repeated, her brow lifting slightly. "I see no misunderstanding, just a pattern that finally met resistance." Claudia's smile strained. "I assure you, I treat everyone equally." "Then let's hope that becomes true," Naomi said, her voice even. "Consistency is the best apology." For a fraction of a second, Claudia's facade cracked. Then she straightened, gave a stiff nod, and walked briskly away. Maya passed by soon after, collecting trays. Her eyes darted toward Naomi, offering the faintest flicker of gratitude. Naomi gave a slight nod, letting her know the message was received. The captain's voice came over the speaker, low and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Ethan Lewis. We're cruising smoothly at 36,000 feet. Expect a calm flight path all the way to Boston. Sit back and enjoy the ride." Naomi caught the subtext calm above didn't always mean calm below. She opened her tablet again, scrolling through notes for her speech, but the words blurred. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the faces she had seen, the tones she had heard, the quiet complicity of those who said nothing. Greg leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You really think they'll follow up on your report?" "They'll have to," she said. "The system logs everything. Cabin number, time of submission, flight ID. It can't be deleted without record." "Smart," Greg murmured. "So you're not just a CEO, you're also their accountability test." Naomi smiled faintly. "I didn't plan to be, but life rarely asked permission before assigning us roles." He studied her face, impressed by her composure. "You don't seem angry." "I am," she said quietly, "but anger is a tool. I've learned to sharpen it before using it." He nodded slowly. "I wish more people did." The plane jolted slightly, just enough to make a few passengers gasp. Naomi's hand shot instinctively to steady her cup. Claudia's voice returned over the intercom, too quick, too tight. "Just a minor pocket of turbulence. Folks, nothing to worry about." But Naomi heard something else beneath that tone, an edge of unease. Maybe the flight report had already reached the captain. Maybe the process had begun. She glanced toward the galley curtain. Claudia stood there, speaking into her crew phone, her posture tense. Maya hovered nearby, arms crossed protectively, listening. Naomi didn't eavesdrop, but she could feel the vibrations of conflict even from a distance. Words like report, incident, and protocol carried through the hum of the engines. A few minutes later, Claudia walked back down the aisle, her face flushed. She stopped by Naomi again, forced a brittle smile, and said, "Dr. Ellis, the captain would like to speak with you when convenient." Naomi nodded. "Now is convenient." Claudia hesitated, clearly not expecting that. "Of course. Please follow me." Naomi stood, smoothing her jacket. As she walked past the rows, she felt dozens of eyes follow her, some curious, some cautious, some quietly supportive. She moved with poise, every step measured, every breath steady. In the small galley near the cockpit, Captain Lewis awaited her. A tall man in his late 40s, calm-eyed, posture like carved oak. His presence filled the narrow space without effort. "Dr. Ellis," he greeted, voice respectful. "I understand you've submitted a conduct report. I wanted to hear from you directly." Naomi met his gaze. "Yes, Captain. I filed it because I believe behavior like this undermines both professionalism and safety. Disrespect doesn't stay small. It spreads. It affects decisions." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I've reviewed the preliminary alert. The system flagged it as high priority due to your position and the keywords you entered. I take this seriously." Claudia stood behind him, her arms folded, eyes fixed on Naomi. "Captain, with respect, this is all a misunderstanding. She's overreacting." Lewis held up a hand, silencing her. "Ms. Reeves, I'll handle this." Naomi kept her tone calm but pointed. When a passenger is dismissed repeatedly based on assumption, that's not overreaction. It's observation. The captain nodded again. Thoughtful. "Would you be willing to provide a statement when we land?" "Of course," Naomi said. He gave a firm nod. "Thank you. In the meantime, I'll make sure service proceeds appropriately. Maya will take over first class for the remainder of the flight." Claudia's mouth opened, then closed again. "Captain, you can't just—" "I can," he said evenly, "and I am." Naomi saw the flash of anger in Claudia's eyes, the pride of authority crumbling under scrutiny. She almost pitied her. Almost. The captain inclined his head to Naomi. "We appreciate your patience, ma'am." Naomi's voice softened. "Thank you for your professionalism, Captain. I hope this serves as reflection, not ruin." He seemed to appreciate the tone, giving a quiet nod before returning to the cockpit. As Naomi walked back to her seat, she could feel the change ripple through the cabin. Maya's relief was visible, her shoulders lighter as she resumed her duties. Passengers exchanged subtle looks, a few nodding slightly toward Naomi, silent acknowledgments of courage. She sat again, buckled in, and glanced out the window. The sun had begun to dip, painting the clouds in shades of amber and rose. She felt tired, but not drained. Tired in the way one feels after lifting a heavy truth into the open air. Greg leaned toward her again. "You just grounded her mid-flight," he whispered. Naomi gave a small laugh. "No. She grounded herself the moment she decided courtesy was optional. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to relax fully against the seat. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew one thing when dignity is tested. Silence can no longer be mistaken for peace." The aircraft continued eastward, a streak of silver against the fading sky, carrying with it a story that was far from over. The hum of the jet filled the cabin like a low heartbeat, steady and constant, as if the aircraft itself were holding its breath. After her conversation with Captain Ethan Lewis, Naomi Ellis felt the shift in atmosphere ripple outward, subtle but unmistakable. Every passenger sensed that something had changed, though few understood what exactly had unfolded behind the galley curtain. Maya Sanchez now moved through the aisles with quiet determination. Her service was calm, deliberate, each gesture infused with a respect that needed no words. She checked Naomi's seat first, offering a fresh cup of tea and a soft smile that carried apology and relief at once. Naomi accepted it with a nod, noticing the tremor still faint in the young woman's hands. "You're doing fine," she whispered, her voice warm but steady. "Thank you," Maya murmured. "It feels lighter now." "It will," Naomi said. "Lightness follows truth." Across the aisle, Greg Wallace was pretending to read a magazine, but failing miserably. His journalist's curiosity itched to document every moment, yet his human decency held him back. He didn't want to turn this into spectacle. He simply wanted people to see what fairness looked like in action. Claudia Reeves, meanwhile, had vanished into the rear galley. Every so often, the curtain would stir, revealing her pacing in small circles. Lips pressed tight. Authority had always been her armor, but Naomi's calm refusal to submit had pierced through it cleanly. The humiliation of being relieved mid-flight was eating at her, burning beneath the mask of professionalism she'd built over decades. Naomi didn't gloat, though she could feel the weight of justice beginning to settle. Instead, she turned her attention back to her tablet. Her speech outline blinked on the screen, the bold title staring back at her healing systems, healing people. She traced the words gently with her fingertip, realizing how painfully relevant they had become. An hour passed. The cabin dimmed as daylight thinned, and the sky outside deepened into a shade of indigo that blurred the horizon. Dinner service began, and this time everything was different. Naomi was served first, not out of pity but out of order restored. She thanked Maya quietly, noting how the passengers around her now seemed unusually polite, even deferential. Change, she thought, rarely began with crowds. It started with one person refusing to shrink. Greg leaned closer, speaking just above a whisper. "You know, Dr. Ellis, I cover corporate accountability for a living, but I've never seen someone handle discrimination with that much grace. Most people would have lost their temper." Naomi smiled slightly, eyes still on the window. Anger burns fast, but integrity, she paused. It endures longer. It's the slow fire that changes metal. Greg nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think the captain will report her officially?" "He has to," Naomi replied. "Policy doesn't end at the cockpit door. The system's designed to record what people try to hide." She turned toward him, her expression unreadable but kind. "Besides, sometimes accountability is less about punishment and more about making sure the truth is written down somewhere permanent." The seatbelt light flicked on again, a small ding that carried through the quiet. The captain's voice followed, measured and calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be encountering some mild turbulence shortly. Please remain seated." Naomi fastened her belt, exhaling slowly. The rhythm of the engines deepened as the plane shifted through unseen currents. Outside, lightning pulsed faintly within a distant cloud, too far to threaten but close enough to catch the light in her eyes. Maya passed through the aisle once more, securing trays and checking latches. Her movements were more confident now, the fear that had once shadowed her replaced by a quiet sense of pride. When she reached Naomi, she whispered, "Captain Lewis asked me to tell you he appreciates your patience." Naomi's lips curved. "Tell him patience is the only fuel that never runs out up here." Maya smiled, nodded, and continued forward. When the turbulence hit, it was light at first, a soft sway that rocked the cups on the trays, but then it deepened into something heavier, unpredictable. The cabin lights flickered, and a few gasps broke the calm. Naomi gripped the armrest lightly, not from fear but from reflex. She had flown enough to know that turbulence was nothing more than air arguing with itself. Still, the shaking went on longer than usual. A few passengers murmured nervously. Greg pressed his hand against the seat in front of him. "That's a bit rough," he muttered. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. Firmer now. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stay seated. We're passing through an unstable air pocket." Naomi watched Maya move toward the jump seat, but just as she did, a tray rolled off a cart and clattered onto the floor, spilling utensils instinctively. Naomi unbuckled her belt and reached down to help stabilize it. "Ma'am, please remain seated," Maya called gently, but Naomi had already caught the sliding tray with one hand, steady and sure. When the plane finally leveled out, a ripple of relieved laughter spread through the cabin. Naomi handed the tray back to Maya, her smile calm. Crisis averted. Maya grinned, cheeks flushed. "You really don't stay still. Do you? Stillness isn't the same as silence." Naomi replied, "Sometimes you move to remind people you're not afraid." As things quieted again, a new voice came through the cabin speakers, one that wasn't Claudia's or the captain's. It was male, professional, and unfamiliar. "Attention, crew. This is Operations Control. please confirm incident report acknowledgement for Flight 287. A hush fell over the first-class cabin. Claudia appeared from the rear galley, stiff and pale. Her headset clicked as she answered in a low tone. Acknowledged. Passengers exchanged puzzled looks. Greg's eyes widened slightly. He turned to Naomi. Did they just say incident report? Naomi's gaze remained steady. They did, in the galley. Claudia's conversation with operations continued, her voice trembling now. Yes, sir, a passenger filed a conduct concern. Yes, I understand. Captain Lewis has assumed oversight of first class. Naomi caught fragments of her tone, fear, disbelief, denial. The realization was sinking in that the company's central system had already flagged her actions for review. When Claudia finally turned, her composure was gone. She walked toward Naomi, words tumbling out in a tone that tried and failed to sound polite. Dr. Ellis, I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding. You didn't need to escalate this. We could have handled it privately. Naomi looked up at her, her voice soft but firm. Privacy is where injustice likes to hide. Sunlight is better. The sentence landed heavier than any accusation. Claudia stood frozen for a moment, lips parted, then walked away without a word. Greg leaned closer, whispering, "That line deserves to be printed." Naomi shook her head gently. It's not meant to be quoted. It's meant to be lived. Outside, the storm had passed. The stars emerged tiny, unwavering, scattered across the black sky like silent witnesses. The cabin lights dimmed again, and a kind of fragile calm returned. But this time, it wasn't the shallow peace of avoidance, it was the deeper quiet that follows truth spoken aloud. As Naomi closed her eyes briefly, she thought of her mother again. There are fights you win with words, and there are fights you win with grace. Tonight, she had chosen both, and somewhere between them, she had found her own version of peace. She didn't yet know that this report, filed quietly above the clouds, would soon ripple far beyond this flight, that it would reach boardrooms, newsrooms, and the hearts of people who had waited their whole lives for someone to stand up calmly and say, "Enough, but for now." She simply breathed. The engines purred steadily, the stars glowed faintly beyond the glass, and her reflection stared back at her with quiet strength, the kind of strength that changes systems without raising its voice. Night had folded itself around the aircraft, soft and infinite. The cabin lights glowed faintly, tracing outlines of faces half asleep. Screens dimmed, the hum of the engines blended into something almost meditative. Naomi Ellis sat awake, her mind neither restless nor still, balanced between reflection and decision. The incident had ended hours ago, yet its echoes lingered. She could feel the tension fading slowly from the air, replaced by a fragile respect. Maya Sanchez, now visibly calmer, moved through the aisles collecting dinner trays. Each time she passed Naomi's seat, her eyes met hers with quiet gratitude, a wordless promise that she would remember this flight for the rest of her career. Greg Wallace had stopped pretending to read. His notebook lay open on the armrest, a few sentences scribbled down in quick, sharp lines. But he wasn't writing a story yet. He was writing to understand. "Dr. Ellis," he whispered, leaning slightly toward her. "You've probably changed more than just this flight tonight." Naomi smiled, soft but tired. "Change doesn't happen in headlines, Mr. Wallace. It begins in the silence that people break." He nodded, thoughtful. "Still, silence doesn't break itself. Someone has to be the first to speak. Naomi looked out the window. The stars shimmered against the black canvas of the sky. Then maybe that's what we're all called to do, she said. Speak, even when it shakes the air around us. The intercom crackled quietly, breaking their hushed exchange. Captain Ethan Lewis's voice, calm and deliberate, came through. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting our descent into Boston in about 40 minutes. Weather is clear, winds are steady, and we're expecting an early landing. Cabin crew, please prepare for final service. The flight was nearing its end, yet Naomi could sense that the real turbulence was still ahead, just not in the sky. From the galley, Claudia Reeves appeared once again, face drawn tight, eyes shadowed with fatigue and fear disguised as poise. She moved mechanically, gathering trays, her once polished tone gone flat. Every gesture carried the heavy weight of consequence. Naomi didn't watch her. She had already decided that gloating wasn't victory. It was poison. She was more interested in what would come after, in what truth could do once it touched the ground. Maya approached quietly with a small gesture. "Dr. Ellis," she whispered. "The captain wanted me to ask if you're comfortable giving a brief statement after landing. He said operations has requested confirmation from you directly." Naomi nodded. "I expected as much. Please tell him I'll cooperate fully." Maya's expression softened into relief. "Thank you. I'm sorry it ever got this far." "Don't be," Naomi replied gently. "Sometimes it has to go far enough for people to notice what's been close all along." Maya lingered for a moment. "I used to think speaking up would ruin everything," she said quietly. "Now I think silence was what did the real damage." Naomi gave her a reassuring smile. "Courage is contagious, Maya. You'll see." The young attendant blinked rapidly, then hurried away before emotion betrayed her. Greg watched her go, shaking his head slightly. "You have a strange effect on people," he said. Naomi chuckled softly. "I don't change them. I just remind them who they already are." Outside, the stars had thinned as the first hint of dawn approached the horizon. The faintest stripe of silver appeared below, where the ocean mirrored the edge of the world. Boston was still an hour away, but Naomi could already feel the pull of the ground, the place where consequences would meet daylight. Claudia, meanwhile, remained near the rear galley, whispering to another attendant. Her voice trembled, the brittle confidence gone. Naomi caught a glimpse of her reflection in the cabin window. Shoulders slumped, jaw tight. There was no triumph in seeing her diminished, only sorrow that arrogance had cost her humanity. The plane dipped slightly, the cabin lights dimming further. Passengers stirred awake, adjusting seat belts, murmuring drowsily. A man across the aisle leaned over and said softly, "Excuse me, ma'am. I just wanted to say, good for you." That took courage. Naomi smiled politely. "Thank you. I just wanted fairness. Nothing more." He nodded. "Still, most people would have let it slide. Letting it slide is how the slope gets steeper," she replied. He nodded again, silent, humbled. Moments later, Claudia began her final walkthrough. Her voice had lost its commanding clarity. She spoke mechanically, ticking through her safety checks. When she reached Naomi's row, she paused, her gaze flickering between apology and pride. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "thank you for flying with Blue Star. I hope the rest of your journey goes smoothly." Naomi met her eyes evenly. "I hope yours does too, Ms. Reeves." The attendant swallowed hard and moved on. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't vengeance either. It was something in between, a kind of mercy wrapped in truth. Greg turned slightly toward Naomi. "You could have destroyed her," he said quietly, "but you didn't." Naomi looked down at her hands. Destroying people never changes systems. It just rearranges the rubble. The engines lowered pitch as the plane began its descent. City lights flickered below like distant constellations, steady and unmoving. The speaker chimed again, seat belts, tray tables, the usual rhythm of landing. As the aircraft tilted slightly downward, Naomi felt a quiet sense of clarity settle over her. The night had shown her something she already knew but sometimes forgot, that dignity didn't need to shout. It only needed to stand still long enough for truth to catch up. She closed her eyes briefly, thinking of her speech waiting in Boston. Her opening line had read, "Health equity begins with empathy." Now she thought of rewriting it. Maybe it should say, "Equality begins when we stop pretending not to see." The tires touched down with a soft screech, the engines reversing, the plane slowing with a gentle shudder. A few passengers clapped out of habit, others stretched, checking their phones for messages. But Naomi didn't move. She sat quietly, waiting for the seatbelt sign to fade, waiting for what she knew was coming next. When it did, it came gently, Maya's voice, soft and respectful. "Dr. Ellis, the captain requests that you remain seated until the other passengers deplane. Operations will meet you at the gate." Naomi nodded. Calm, of course. As people began to gather their belongings, whispers floated through the cabin. "That's her, the CEO," someone murmured. "Something happened with the crew. I heard she grounded the flight." "No, they just rerouted protocol." Naomi ignored the murmurs. Gossip was the smoke that rose when truth caught fire. Greg gathered his things but hesitated before standing. "If you don't mind," he said, "I'd like to stay, to see how this ends." She smiled. "Journalists never stop watching, do they? Not the good ones," he said. The doors opened with a soft hiss. The morning light spilled into the cabin, golden and new. The air smelled faintly of coffee and metal. One by one, passengers filed out, glancing back at Naomi with cautious respect. When the cabin was nearly empty, Captain Lewis appeared, hat under his arm. His face was calm, composed, but there was gravity in his eyes. "Dr. Ellis," he said, "thank you for your patience. Operations Control is waiting just beyond the gate. They've requested your statement in person." "Of course," Naomi said. "I'll cooperate fully." He nodded. "For what it's worth, I admire how you handled this." She inclined her head slightly. "For what it's worth, I admire that you didn't look away." He smiled faintly, then extended a hand to help her with her bag. As she stood, Maya approached quietly from behind him, eyes glassy with emotion. "Good luck, Dr. Ellis," she whispered. Naomi smiled gently. "Luck favors the honest. Maya, keep being that." Then she stepped into the jet bridge, her heels clicking softly against the metal floor. Ahead waited the quiet hum of an airport waking to morning, and with it, the first step of accountability. She didn't yet know how wide this story would travel, or how deep it would cut, but she could feel it, the shift in gravity, the unseen ripple of a single act of calm defiance, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and the ache of memory, Naomi felt something rare and powerful rise within her. It wasn't victory. It was clarity. The early light spilling through the jet bridge was thin and pale. the kind that made everything look both new and exhausted at once. Naomi Ellis stepped into it with the measured grace of someone who knew eyes were on her, behind her. The cabin door closed with a metallic click that seemed to seal one chapter and open another. The hum of the airport surrounded her luggage wheels, boarding calls, the rhythm of movement that defined modern travel. At the gate, two people waited. One was a tall man in a gray uniform jacket with captain's stripes still pinned neatly on the shoulders. The other, in a dark blazer and airport badge, had the expression of someone sent to contain a fire already too large to hide. Dr. Ellis, the captain greeted, his tone calm but weighted. "This is Linda Hayes, our on-ground operations director. She'll be handling the report from here." Naomi extended her hand first, polite but firm. "Ms. Hayes." Linda's handshake was quick, professional. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the captain before meeting Naomi's. "Dr. Ellis, thank you for taking the time. I understand there were concerns about crew conduct on your flight. We'd like to discuss the details in a private lounge, if that's all right." "Of course," Naomi replied evenly. "Transparency doesn't need an audience." Captain Lewis gave a short nod. "I'll join you, if that's acceptable." Linda hesitated, then gestured toward a quiet corridor. "Right this way." They walked together, their footsteps echoing against the tile floor. Naomi's composure didn't falter, but the air around her carried quiet intensity. Greg Wallace followed at a respectful distance, notebook tucked beneath his arm. Granted permission to observe at Naomi's request, inside the lounge, the world seemed muted. The walls were a soft gray, the light gentle. A pot of coffee steamed on the side table, untouched. Linda set down a folder embossed with the Blue Star Air insignia and opened it. "Dr. Ellis," she began. "I've reviewed the initial flight report from Captain Lewis and the incident log submitted through our passenger system. Before we proceed further, I'd like to hear your account directly." Naomi folded her hands. "I'd prefer not to relive the smaller details," she said quietly. "They're not the point. What matters is that I was repeatedly ignored, dismissed, and addressed as though I didn't belong where my ticket placed me. That behavior isn't just discourteous, it's discriminatory, and it undermines passenger safety." Linda nodded, her pen moving across the page. "Understood. And you believe this behavior was specific to you?" Naomi met her gaze. "It wasn't the first time I've been looked at that way in first class, but it's the first time I've decided to stop pretending it doesn't matter." The captain sat back, arms crossed, watching carefully. He had seen many passenger disputes over the years, but something about this one felt different, deeper, more reflective of something systemic rather than situational. Linda flipped to another page. The crew member in question, Ms. Reeves, has served with Blue Star for over 20 years. Her record has been mostly positive, though there were a few minor notes regarding communication tone. Nothing like this. However, Naomi's expression didn't change. That doesn't surprise me. Bias rarely announces itself loudly. It prefers a quieter stage. Linda hesitated, her pen stilling on the page. "We'll, of course, be conducting a full internal review." Naomi leaned forward slightly. "Internal reviews don't change cultures, Ms. Hayes. They protect them." The words landed like a quiet thunderclap. The room seemed to pause around them. Greg, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. "Doctor, Ellis has a point. You can't just treat this as an isolated incident when it clearly reveals a pattern." Linda turned to him. "And you are Greg Wallace, journalist." The operations director's jaw tightened. "I see. Well, this meeting isn't intended for media participation," Naomi interjected softly, her voice carrying authority. "Mr. Wallace is here because transparency starts with witnesses. I trust him." Linda exhaled, pressing her lips together before nodding curtly. "Understood." Captain Lewis cleared his throat, breaking the tension. For the record, Dr. Ellis was calm, factual, and respectful at all times. "My decision to relieve Ms. Reeves of cabin duty wasn't just based on her behavior toward Dr. Ellis, it was her overall unprofessional demeanor. I've filed my own report as well." Linda wrote that down, her eyes narrowing slightly as she processed the weight of his statement. Naomi took a quiet sip of water before speaking again. "I didn't call for punishment. I called for reflection. But reflection only matters if it leads to reform." The captain nodded slowly. "That's fair." Linda closed her folder. "Dr. Ellis will begin a formal inquiry immediately. You'll receive an acknowledgement letter from our corporate office within 24 hours, and a follow-up within a week." Naomi stood. "Good. And I'll be sending a parallel report to the Federal Aviation Office and the Department of Transportation's Passenger Rights Division. That way, your follow-up has context." Linda froze for half a second before masking her surprise. "Of course, you're entitled to do so." Naomi smiled politely. "Entitlement has nothing to do with it. Ms. Hayes, accountability does." Greg bit back a grin. He had seen powerful people in boardrooms his whole career, but never someone who wielded truth like this with calm precision rather than noise. Captain Lewis escorted Naomi back toward the terminal after the meeting. The walkway buzzed with the rhythm of travel boarding calls, rolling suitcases, the echo of new departures. "Dr. Ellis," he said, "I want you to know that I've already filed a secondary notice to headquarters. Whatever happens, I'll make sure your account isn't buried." Naomi looked at him, genuine gratitude softening her tone. "That means more than you think, Captain. Thank you." He smiled faintly. "For what it's worth, you handled that with more grace than most executives I've flown." "I've had practice," she said quietly. "Life has a way of teaching diplomacy through pain." They reached the gate where a few lingering passengers still milled about, collecting their luggage. Claudia Reeves stood near the counter, eyes red-rimmed, her uniform cap clutched in both hands. She looked smaller now, deflated. When her gaze met Naomi's, she flinched slightly. For a moment, Naomi considered walking past, then she stopped. "Ms. Reeves," she said softly. Claudia turned, her voice barely audible. "Dr. Ellis, I didn't mean for it to become this. I was having a bad day." Naomi raised a hand gently. "Bad days don't excuse bad patterns, but I hope this helps you see them before they cost you more than your job." Claudia's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to find words. Naomi inclined her head once, then continued toward the exit. Greg followed, quiet, thoughtful. Outside security, the morning light had turned golden, catching on the polished floors and the glass walls that reflected the rising sun. The world felt awake now, bright, open, alive. Greg broke the silence. That wasn't just a confrontation, that was a masterclass in restraint. Naomi smiled, though her eyes were distant. Restraint is power under control. People mistake it for weakness because they've never learned to hold it. Do you think this will change anything?" he asked. Naomi paused before answering. "Change doesn't start with consequences, Mr. Wallace. It starts with awareness. And sometimes awareness is the loudest sound silence can make." He nodded slowly, closing his notebook. "I hope you don't mind, but when I write about this, if I do, I want it to be about that." "I don't mind," Naomi said, "as long as you tell it like it was. No anger, just truth." The journalist smiled faintly. "That's harder than it sounds. Everything worth saying usually is," she replied. As they walked toward the exit, Naomi's phone buzzed. A message from her assistant flashed across the screen. "Vitalis board wants update before your speech. Need to confirm Boston arrival." She typed a simple reply. "Landed. All is well. Will call soon." But well was relative. What had begun as an act of dismissal had become something much larger. Something with momentum she could no longer contain, even if she wanted to. Somewhere. An airline's internal system was already flagging her name, her report, her voice, and somewhere else, far above the ground they'd just left. Truth was still flying steady, quiet, unstoppable. Boston Logan Airport buzzed with the quiet efficiency of early morning travelers, but Naomi Ellis moved through it like someone carrying calm through a storm. Her footsteps were measured, deliberate, the subtle rhythm of authority in every stride. Around her, the terminal thrummed with announcements, rolling suitcases, and the low murmur of conversations. Yet she felt an invisible bubble of focus. Today, the world outside was moving, but she was already several steps ahead. Greg Wallace stayed a few paces behind, notebook tucked under his arm. His eyes scanned the scene not for spectacle, but for human detail, the tense glance of a gate agent, the hurried movements of uniformed staff, the silent acknowledgement of other passengers who had witnessed the mid-flight conflict. He scribbled notes in shorthand, careful not to lose the essence of the unfolding story. Naomi approached a private conference room arranged by airport operations. Linda Hayes greeted her at the door, clipboard in hand, eyes cautious but attentive. "Dr. Ellis," she said, her tone carrying both deference and urgency. "We've gathered preliminary statements from the cabin crew and a few witnesses. Captain Lewis has included his report. We'd like to go through the sequence of events with you to ensure accuracy before sending it to headquarters." "Of course," Naomi replied evenly. She knew that control of narrative was crucial. Truth mattered, but so did clarity, precision, and the careful timing of disclosure. She entered the room, Greg following silently. The interior was minimalist, the light soft, the walls a neutral gray that seemed to absorb emotion. Here, in this quiet space, Naomi felt the weight of responsibility shift not just for herself, but for everyone who might face similar prejudice in the future. Linda began methodically, reading the preliminary statements. Claudia Reeves's account was defensive, filled with excuses masked as protocol adherence. She claimed she had been overwhelmed by passenger requests, that Naomi had been difficult, that her actions were misinterpreted. Naomi listened without interruption, noting every slight exaggeration, every omission. Greg scribbled notes rapidly, his pen moving like a brush across a canvas, capturing the dissonance between what Claudia reported and what Naomi had experienced. Captain Lewis added context from the cockpit perspective, noting the pattern of inattention Naomi endured and confirming the intervention to relieve Claudia of duty was both necessary and measured. Naomi's gaze softened slightly. Here was fairness in action, procedural integrity manifest. Then Linda turned her attention to Naomi. Dr. Ellis, would you like to provide your version in detail? Anything you share will be attached to the formal report and reviewed by corporate compliance and HR. Naomi nodded. Yes, I want the timeline, the actions, and the atmosphere recorded accurately. It's not about punishment, but accountability. This behavior isn't personal, it's systemic. It's a culture of dismissal and subtle exclusion that requires correction, not just reprimand. Her words hung in the room like a quiet thunder. Greg glanced up from his notes, noting how she commanded attention without raising her voice. Naomi continued, recounting the flight, the repeated neglect, the deliberate omissions, the microaggressions, the precise moments where she pressed the call button, and Claudia's responses. She emphasized the observation rather than the emotion, letting facts build the case. Linda listened, nodding at intervals, pen moving across the pages. We will ensure that this is reflected fully, she said. Captain Lewis, can you verify these points? He did, concisely and without embellishment. Every timestamp, every step, confirmed. The weight of corroboration solidified the truth. Naomi leaned back slightly, letting the room absorb her presence. Also, she added, I want the full names and positions of the crew on this flight, including any supervisors or HR personnel involved in reporting or oversight. Transparency matters. Linda hesitated, but her professional instinct won out. That can be arranged, she said. Greg observed, impressed by the thoroughness and strategic restraint Naomi displayed. She wasn't interested in theatrical justice. Her approach was meticulous, surgical, and deliberate. Every move considered the wider impact, every word designed to secure systemic integrity once the statements were recorded. Naomi requested a moment alone with Maya Sanchez, who had accompanied the flight in a supporting capacity. The young attendant approached, visibly nervous but determined, her earlier fear now replaced with quiet resolve. Maya, Naomi said gently, thank you for supporting integrity in your actions today. You've already done the right thing. Maya's eyes glistened. I was scared. I didn't know if I could, if I should. You did, Naomi replied softly. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. Remember this moment. Carry it forward. It will shape every choice you make from now on. Maya nodded, and for the first time, she felt a quiet empowerment settle over her. Outside the lounge, airport staff were beginning to stir. Word had spread through internal communications an incident flagged. A report filed by a high-profile corporate client. The air of tension lingered, quiet but palpable. Naomi could feel the ripple effect of her actions, already moving through protocols, hierarchy, and internal audits. She stepped out into the terminal with Greg, noting the subtle glances from passing passengers and staff alike. It wasn't recognition, they didn't know her, but there was acknowledgement, an invisible hum of respect. Do you feel like this will change anything? Greg asked, voice low. Naomi considered the question, scanning the busy terminal. Systems don't change overnight, Mr. Wallace, but people do. One act can't fix a culture, but it can open eyes and create accountability. That's where change begins. Greg nodded, realizing the depth of what he had witnessed. It wasn't just a CEO asserting authority, it was a lesson in strategic moral courage. Later, as Naomi moved toward her car, phone buzzing with corporate updates and messages, She allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought of the flight, Claudia's defiance, Maya's quiet bravery, Captain Lewis's decisiveness, and recognized that small acts of integrity could ripple far beyond their immediate scope. The plane, now empty, sat quietly at the gate, a metallic witness to the events above. Naomi had not shouted, had not lashed out, had not demanded retribution. She had done something subtler. Stronger, she had refused to be erased, and in doing so, she had altered the trajectory of everyone involved. Greg walked beside her, notebook closed, expression contemplative. "You've set a high bar," he said softly. Naomi smiled faintly. "It's not about me. It's about what's right." The sun had risen fully now, the morning light spilling over the terminal windows. Outside, the city stretched awake. Naomi felt the quiet satisfaction of work done with integrity, knowing that the echoes of her actions would continue to unfold long after she stepped into her car. She turned briefly toward Greg. "Remember, this fairness is not given, it is claimed, and once claimed, it must be defended." Greg nodded, scribbling one last note. "I'll remember." "Dr. Ellis." Naomi looked toward the horizon, the city bustling yet unaware of the waves of change quietly spreading through it. She drew a deep breath, a calm smile touching her lips. The battle wasn't over, but the first victories had been secured. And somewhere within that ordinary morning in Boston, Naomi Ellis walked forward with the certainty that truth, calm, and integrity were forces stronger than arrogance or fear. By late morning, Naomi Ellis had reached her office downtown, the glass walls offering a panoramic view of Boston's awakening skyline. Her heels clicked against polished floors, each step echoing authority yet calm determination. She was not in a hurry. The flight, the confrontation, the initial reporting, it had been only the beginning. The next stage required precision, strategy, and patience. Today was about making sure that what happened mid-air did not fade into an excuse or an overlooked incident. Her assistant, Jordan Fields, met her at the door. "Dr. Ellis, I've confirmed that your statements from the flight have been logged with the FAA and DOT. Corporate operations at Blue Star have already escalated it to their ethics division. I've also arranged for your legal team to join remotely in 30 minutes. Naomi nodded. "Good. Prepare the documents for them. I want everything in order: timestamps, crew statements, witness accounts, flight logs, even the sequence of service requests." Jordan hesitated. "Are you sure you want to push this so aggressively?" Naomi looked at him, calm and unwavering. "I'm not pushing aggressively. Jordan, I'm ensuring accountability. Aggression is shouting. This is strategy." Jordan nodded, understanding. He'd seen her handle corporate crises before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about business. It was about dignity, fairness, and precedent. Meanwhile, back at Blue Star Airlines, a storm was quietly brewing. The internal operations and HR departments had already begun compiling statements, reviewing security footage, and documenting the flight. Gregory Adler, Senior Vice President of HR, was pacing his office. His usually impeccable composure had begun to crack as reports filtered in. He had expected this to be a minor inconvenience, a VIP complaint easily managed, quickly closed. Instead, the passenger's report had escalated into a procedural flag across multiple systems. Lorraine Reeves sat stiffly across from Adler, her hands folded, eyes flicking nervously around the room. Her years of authority in the cabin suddenly felt fragile. She had underestimated Naomi Ellis, not her power, not her reach, not her intellect. Now, with every statement being collected, every timestamp logged, her past actions were under scrutiny. "She's meticulous," Lorraine muttered under her breath. "You can't just... She keeps everything exact." Adler's jaw tightened. "That's why this is serious. If her legal team digs, it won't just be about the flight. It could expose systemic negligence, patterns of bias, even lapses in our reporting processes. We need to contain this before it snowballs." Lorraine tried to speak again, but Adler silenced her. "You need to understand. The minute this reaches the FAA in detail, the narrative changes. Your excuses won't hold. Everything you did or failed to do is being documented." Back in her office, Naomi sat before a large screen as Catherine Webb, her lead attorney, joined via video call. Webb's presence was formidable, radiating experience and authority that even seasoned executives recognized. "Dr. Ellis," Catherine said, voice sharp and deliberate, "we've compiled all the preliminary flight data, your statements, witness observations, and passenger testimonies. This is enough to trigger an internal compliance audit and a formal FAA investigation. But we need your approval to proceed with a broader discovery request, including employment histories, prior complaints, and internal HR correspondence related to Lorraine Reeves." Naomi's gaze was steady. "Do it. I want the full scope. It's not about vindictiveness, it's about making sure no one else has to endure what I did. I want patterns exposed, not people embarrassed unnecessarily. Systemic issues. Catherine, not just personal grudges." Catherine nodded. "Understood. We'll file immediately and ensure all legal protections are in place for any witnesses who may come forward. We'll need to guarantee anonymity where needed, especially for junior crew members who fear retaliation." Naomi leaned back, her eyes scanning the Boston skyline again. "Exactly. Courage must be protected, or it dies before it grows." At Blue Star headquarters, the first tremors of internal panic were now visible. Adler was meeting with senior operations managers. "We need to control the narrative. We can't allow this incident to be publicized as discrimination without context," he said. "We'll frame it as a passenger complaint, VIP, high profile, but handled, maintain internal confidentiality." A junior manager spoke hesitantly. "But what about the captain's report? And the timestamps?" Adler waved his hand dismissively. "Adjust the emphasis, highlight professionalism, minimize allegations. We're not lying. We're prioritizing optics." Lorraine Reeves sat quietly in her office, staring at the ceiling. She had spent decades commanding authority in the first-class cabin. Now, every act she had justified in the name of procedure was being dissected. The realization of personal accountability, combined with the looming scrutiny, pressed down on her like the heavy metal of the airplane fuselage she had once ruled from above. Meanwhile, Naomi's legal team began making discreet inquiries, reaching out to flight attendants who had served with Lorraine. Maya Sanchez had already agreed to cooperate, providing detailed accounts of observed bias, omissions, and procedural lapses. Her courage was growing steadily, a quiet counterweight to the fear that had shadowed her actions earlier. Naomi observed as each piece fell into place: the flight log, witness statements, timestamps, internal reports. Each document was a brushstroke in a larger painting. One small act on a plane had sparked the beginnings of systemic investigation. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, noting the calm satisfaction that comes from methodical preparation. Greg Wallace, observing remotely via the secure press channel Naomi had arranged, leaned back. "This is going to be big," he said quietly. "The ripple from a single flight. I've never seen anything like it." Naomi shook her head lightly. "It's not just a flight, Greg. It's about what happens when someone refuses to be erased. That's the real story." By afternoon, the formal requests had been submitted. The FAA had been notified. The Department of Transportation had logged the incident. Statements were being collected, corroborated, and time-stamped. The airline, despite its attempts at internal narrative control, could feel the growing weight of evidence. Naomi allowed herself a faint smile. The wheels had been set in motion. They would move forward, inevitably, because truth has its own momentum. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The act of courage that had begun thousands of feet above the ground had now transitioned into procedural force, unstoppable and precise. This was how real change began, not with rage or spectacle, but with steady, strategic insistence on accountability. Minutes later, Maya Sanchez appeared in Naomi's office, carrying a small stack of notes. "Dr. Ellis, I've compiled everything I remember from the flight. It's all detailed and chronological. You wanted it." Naomi accepted the folder, her smile warm. "Thank you. Maya, you've done well. The smallest acts of honesty ripple farther than you realize." Maya blinked, startled at the depth of meaning in the words. I just didn't want anyone else to be treated that way," she said softly. "And you didn't let fear stop you." Naomi replied, "Remember that. It will guide you more than any manual or protocol ever could." Greg watched silently, impressed by the quiet mentorship unfolding. He realized the story he was witnessing wasn't just about discrimination, accountability, or corporate procedure. It was about the transformative power of courage, the deliberate dismantling of apathy, and the way a single principled individual could catalyze change across an entire system. By evening, Naomi's office was quiet except for the soft hum of air conditioning. She leaned back in her chair, thinking about the coming weeks. Investigations, legal filings, internal audits, they were only the beginning. Cultural change required patience, persistence, and a clear demonstration that actions have consequences. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The flight, the confrontation, the calm assertion of rights, it had all led to this point, and yet the real work was just beginning. Outside, Boston's city lights blinked as dusk settled over the skyline. Naomi's phone buzzed gently. Another message from the legal team, all requests acknowledged, first round of statements secured. She typed a short reply, "Excellent, proceed." The ripple of truth she had started mid-flight was now moving through the corridors of power, quietly, inexorably. It was a reminder that courage, clarity, and calm resolve could do what noise, anger, or rage could not change the system from within. And as she gazed out at the fading light, Naomi Ellis knew that this was only the beginning of a broader transformation. Not just for the airline, not just for the flight attendants, but for every person who had ever been made invisible when their presence should have been acknowledged. By the following morning, the corporate world of Blue Star Airlines was already in disarray. Naomi Ellis's calm but unwavering insistence had set in motion a chain reaction that no amount of internal spin could contain. Emails buzzed frantically between departments, executives whispered in conference rooms, and HR conference calls stretched across time zones. In her corner office overlooking the city, Naomi sat quietly at her desk, reviewing the documentation Catherine Webb's team had compiled overnight. Flight logs, crew statements, timestamps, and witness testimonies filled neatly organized folders. Each page reinforced the same undeniable truth: systemic negligence, repeated bias, and a failure to hold staff accountable had allowed discriminatory behavior to fester unchecked. Her phone rang, and she picked it up promptly. Naomi Ellis. Dr. Ellis, this is Edward Coleman, the CEO of Blue Star Airlines, said, his voice low and tight. I've received preliminary reports. I did not expect the escalation to reach this level. Naomi leaned back, letting her gaze settle on the horizon beyond her office. Mr. Coleman, the escalation was necessary. The flight, the conduct of your crew, the lack of accountability, these are issues that affect your passengers, your company, and your reputation. Ignoring them would have been far more costly than addressing them head-on. Coleman exhaled a long, heavy breath. I understand that, Dr. Ellis, but this is unprecedented. What exactly do you want from me at this stage? I want full transparency, Naomi said firmly. I want Gregory Adler terminated for gross negligence in handling prior complaints and for failing to act on credible reports of discrimination. I want an independent audit of your HR processes, conducted by a team approved by my legal counsel. And I want a public acknowledgement of the discrimination I endured, along with a commitment to training and systemic reform. A long silence followed. Coleman's voice, when it returned, was subdued. You're asking for a lot. Naomi's tone was calm, resolute. I'm asking for what is right. Across town, Gregory Adler sat in his office, staring at his computer screen. Overnight, the ripple effects of Naomi's action had reached his inbox. An internal memo flagged the incident as a potential corporate liability. Every email, every statement, every timestamp had been cataloged by Naomi's legal team. Adler's attempts to downplay the events were no longer viable. The reality was stark. His career was on the line. He ran a hand through his hair, tension mounting. 30 years, he muttered to himself, and it all comes down to one flight. Meanwhile, Claudia Reeves faced her own reckoning. The internal review had uncovered prior complaints, subtle yet consistent patterns of preferential treatment and dismissal of certain passengers. The evidence painted a picture of a long-standing culture of exclusion and bias, and her credibility had begun to crumble. The airline's legal counsel summoned her for an urgent meeting, making it clear that her career and potentially her professional license was at risk. Back at Naomi's office, Catherine Webb joined via video call. Dr. Ellis, the first batch of depositions is complete, she said. Jenna Sanchez has provided a comprehensive statement, corroborating your account and given us insight into the broader culture on the aircraft. We also have passenger statements ready, including Mr. Wallace's. The momentum is on our side. Naomi allowed a small nod of satisfaction. Excellent. Let's proceed with the discovery request to obtain internal HR files, prior complaints, and any relevant correspondence. I want the full picture. No detail is too small to matter. Catherine tapped a few keys, sending the requests in motion. We'll ensure the requests are filed with court oversight to maintain legitimacy and enforceability. Blue Star cannot claim ignorance. As the day progressed, media whispers began surfacing. Aviation blogs hinted at an unusual incident involving a prominent CEO and a first-class flight. While the details were sparse, the mere suggestion of a high-profile passenger asserting accountability began stirring internal anxiety at Blue Star headquarters. Coleman called an emergency meeting of his executive team. "We cannot let this spin out of control," he said, pacing the room. "The passenger claims discrimination. Our HR processes are being scrutinized, and our reputation is on the line. Gregory, what's your assessment?" Adler, who had reluctantly joined the meeting, spoke carefully. "We have begun internal investigations, sir, but the passenger's legal counsel is aggressive. Naomi Ellis is leveraging not only her corporate position but also regulatory oversight. We're already seeing requests for documentation and witness testimonies. Containment is difficult without full transparency." Coleman's eyes narrowed. Transparency or surrender? Adler hesitated, realizing the line between the two had blurred irreversibly. "At this stage, sir, compliance dictates transparency. Ignoring it would be catastrophic." Back in Naomi's office, she received a text from Greg Wallace. "They're spinning it as a VIP dispute. Everyone's talking quietly. Looks like the narrative is shifting." She typed a brief reply, "Let them talk. Facts are louder than speculation." By mid-afternoon, the first wave of internal audits had returned preliminary findings. Multiple instances of biased behavior, procedural lapses, and inadequate reporting mechanisms were documented across several flight crews. Patterns of discrimination and favoritism emerged, clearly illustrating that Naomi's experience was not an isolated incident. Naomi sat quietly, reviewing the reports. Each page confirmed what she already knew: structural reform was necessary, and systemic change would not occur without deliberate action. Catherine Webb's voice broke the silence. "Dr. Ellis, with these findings, we can push for immediate executive action. We can compel the termination of those responsible, mandate training programs, and establish oversight committees to monitor future compliance. This will be a message not just to Blue Star, but to the industry at large." Naomi leaned back, her expression calm. "Exactly. This isn't just about me. It's about creating a framework where no passenger, regardless of status, is invisible or dismissed. It's about safety, fairness, and accountability." Meanwhile, Blue Star's corporate offices were in quiet chaos. Employees whispered in hallways, executives huddled in conference rooms, and calls flew back and forth attempting damage control. Adler's attempts to spin the narrative were undermined by the clear, corroborated evidence Naomi had secured. Every document, every timestamp, every witness statement strengthened her position and weakened the defenses he had relied on for years. By evening, Coleman made his decision. He summoned Adler, Claudia Reeves, and the senior legal team to a meeting, effective immediately. He announced, "Gregory Adler is relieved of his duties. Claudia Reeves will be reassigned pending further review. We are instituting an independent audit of HR and operational procedures. Dr. Ellis's complaint will be fully investigated and addressed, and we will issue a formal acknowledgement of the incident." Lorraine Reeves's face paled. Adler's jaw tightened. The ripple had become a wave, and it was sweeping them both into consequences they could neither predict nor prevent. Naomi Ellis, back in her office, allowed herself a brief moment of quiet satisfaction. She had not shouted, had not demanded retribution. She had acted with methodical calm, with evidence, and with integrity. The system had begun to respond not out of fear, but out of undeniable truth, Greg Wallace observed from his nearby seat, awestruck. "You've turned one flight into a corporate reckoning," he said softly. Naomi smiled faintly. One act of courage, done deliberately and without haste, can create more change than years of noise. The truth moves steadily, and when it finds purchase, it cannot be ignored. The sun dipped below the Boston skyline, casting long shadows across the office floor. Naomi leaned back in her chair, eyes thoughtful. Today had been a victory not for ego, not for pride, but for justice and the integrity of systems designed to serve the public. And somewhere within the quiet of the fading day, she knew the real work was just beginning. The consequences of action would continue to unfold. But, for the first time, she felt confident that accountability had found a foothold. The following morning, the headquarters of Blue Star Airlines was cloaked in tension. Floors that usually hummed with routine were quiet except for the occasional hurried steps of executives moving between offices. Naomi Ellis sat in her temporary office suite, her gaze steady on the sunrise spilling through the large windows. The city below awakened, unaware of the ripple her single flight had created. Every email, every report, every legal filing had shifted the landscape of the company's internal operations. Today, the consequences were becoming unavoidable. Her phone buzzed. Catherine Webb appeared on the video line, her expression precise but calm. "Dr. Ellis, the DOJ has acknowledged receipt of the files and statements. Preliminary inquiries have already been scheduled. Blue Star's internal audit will proceed under court oversight, ensuring impartiality. This is moving faster than expected." Naomi nodded, her hands folded. "Good. Let them process. Our responsibility is clear documentation, full transparency, and moral consistency. Nothing more, nothing less." Meanwhile, Gregory Adler had been summoned to the CEO's office. His usual poise was replaced by a tight-lipped anxiety as he entered the room. Edward Coleman, seated behind the large mahogany desk, did not mince words. "Gregory, the internal audit has revealed patterns of negligence in reporting complaints and protecting passengers. Your handling of these matters has been insufficient, effective immediately. You are relieved of all HR duties and suspended pending further investigation." Adler's face drained of color. "Sir, I was following protocol. The incidents were minor." Coleman cut him off sharply. "Minor incidents compounded over years become systemic failure. You are accountable. Your judgment compromised both passengers and employees. Simultaneously, Claudia Reeves was in a separate conference room with corporate counsel. The review of her prior flights, the complaints from colleagues, and the witness statements painted a detailed portrait of habitual bias. Her uniform, once a symbol of authority, now felt like a weight around her shoulders. I didn't realize it had reached this level," she whispered. Counsel gave a firm nod. "Ms. Reeves, this is why documentation matters. Your actions have consequences far beyond the cabin. We will guide you through the process, but the evidence is clear." Back in Naomi's office, Maya Sanchez entered quietly, carrying her notebook and a small coffee for Naomi. Her eyes were brighter now, reflecting a new confidence, tempered with humility. "Dr. Ellis, I just wanted to thank you again." I never realized how much courage mattered until today. Naomi looked at her, a soft smile warming her features. Courage is quiet. Maya, it doesn't seek recognition, but it shapes everything it touches. Remember what you did. One small act of integrity can ripple far beyond your immediate world. Maya nodded, visibly strengthened by the acknowledgement. I'll remember, and I'll act again, when needed. Outside the office, Greg Wallace watched the unfolding events with fascination. He had chronicled many stories of corporate missteps, but rarely had he seen accountability cascade so swiftly and deliberately. Naomi Ellis had not just called out wrongdoing, she had catalyzed a system-wide examination that few could ignore. Naomi leaned back in her chair, her mind tracing the chain of events from the flight itself to the ongoing corporate audits. The precision, calm, and strategy with which she had approached the situation had created a template for ethical enforcement that could inspire others. She allowed herself a quiet reflection on the profound responsibility that came with power. By late afternoon, Blue Star's HR office was buzzing. Employees were now required to attend mandatory briefings about compliance, reporting procedures, and passenger dignity. The internal culture was under scrutiny from legal oversight and corporate governance. Claudia Reeves had been reassigned, her future uncertain. Gregory Adler faced an official investigation and the looming possibility of permanent removal. Naomi's influence had created not just accountability, but a structural shift in operational procedures. Naomi reviewed the latest reports and noticed small details, witness statements confirming procedural lapses, timestamps showing repeated neglect, subtle patterns of discriminatory assumptions. Each piece reinforced her belief that systemic change required attention to detail, empathy, and courage. Greg Wallace, notebook in hand, quietly remarked, "It's amazing how one person's steadfastness can unearth decades of negligence." Naomi nodded, though her expression remained serene. It isn't about being steadfast, it's about consistency, integrity, and preparation. One cannot act morally in fragments. Truth demands wholeness. Evening fell, casting long shadows across the city. Naomi found herself standing by the window, looking out over Boston Harbor. The water shimmered in the fading light, reflecting both the quiet and the inevitability of consequences. It struck her that the flight, which had seemed a singular moment, had become an instrument for systemic reflection, accountability, and transformation. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Catherine Webb confirming that preliminary filings with the DOJ included full documentation of prior incidents, witness accounts, and HR communications. Naomi allowed herself a small, rare smile. Justice, she reflected, was not about vengeance but about clarity, integrity, and the courage to hold structures accountable. Maya joined her at the window, quietly observing the harbor. "Dr. Ellis," she said softly, "do you think it will make a difference?" Naomi turned, her gaze steady. "It already has." Maya, awareness is the first step toward change. And when systems see that integrity is valued, that courage matters, the ripple spreads farther than any single action. They stood in quiet reflection, the hum of the city below contrasting with the calm resolve that Naomi carried. The flight, the confrontation, and the corporate storm it had ignited had become more than an isolated incident. They were a lesson in accountability, moral courage, and the power of meticulous, deliberate action. By the time the city lights flickered on, Naomi's phone vibrated with a message from a colleague confirming an upcoming press briefing. The story was about to reach a wider audience, but she did not feel triumph or self-congratulation. She felt responsibility for the precedent she was setting, for the system she was challenging, and for every individual who could be empowered by the example she had created. Naomi turned to Greg Wallace, who had been silently documenting the day's events. "Remember this," she said gently. "Accountability begins with observation, grows with courage, and solidifies with action. When all three align, even entrenched systems can be made to bend toward justice." Greg nodded, absorbing the gravity of her words. "I'll make sure it's told accurately," he said. Naomi allowed herself a moment of calm reflection. The long path from the initial slide on the flight to the beginning of structural reform had been arduous, deliberate, and exhausting. And yet, she knew that persistence, clarity, and integrity would carry the impact forward in ways that mere outrage never could. Outside, the harbor reflected the first stars of evening, a calm mirror to the quiet revolution Naomi had set in motion. For those who had doubted, for those who had hesitated, for those who had remained silent, the example was clear. Courage, strategy, and truth could ripple across the highest systems, transforming culture from within. And as Naomi prepared to leave her office, she glanced back at the folders and statements meticulously organized on her desk. Each document was a testament to accountability, each timestamp a marker of truth, each witness statement a reaffirmation that justice could be pursued not with spectacle, but with reasoned persistence and principled courage. Weeks later, Boston's skyline glimmered under the early morning sun as Naomi Ellis arrived at the headquarters of Origin Innovations. Her movements were measured, confident, yet tempered with the quiet humility that came from understanding the weight of influence. The journey from a single slide on a flight to systemic corporate accountability had been long, precise, and exhausting. But today, she felt the first real relief of tangible change. Inside, her team gathered around a long table, laptops open, coffee cups steaming. The energy was a mix of focus, curiosity, and quiet admiration. Naomi's presence demanded attention, not through authority alone, but through the unspoken gravity of her experience, the clarity of her decisions, and the integrity of her actions. "Good morning, everyone," Naomi began, her voice calm and steady. "We've recently completed a critical initiative, not in our lab, not in our field operations, but in the world of ethics, fairness, and accountability. What happened with Blue Star Airlines is now setting precedent for how corporate behavior should respond to discrimination and misconduct. Today, I want us to reflect on that, and also prepare for the steps we'll take next." Maya Sanchez, who had grown in confidence after her key witness role, spoke up first. "Dr. Ellis, seeing the impact of what happened, I feel like what we did together matters beyond that one flight. It's like the whole system started to shift." Naomi smiled softly. "Exactly, Maya. Courage and clarity, when combined with persistence, create ripples that extend far beyond the immediate context. One voice, when guided by integrity, can change structures." Meanwhile, in a conference room at Blue Star Airlines, Edward Coleman, the CEO, reviewed the aftermath of the internal audit and the DOJ involvement. Employees were now attending mandatory training, led by an independent team of specialists, and procedural reforms were being implemented. Gregory Adler had been formally terminated for negligence, and Claudia Reeves faced further disciplinary action, her reassignment now permanent. The ripple Naomi had begun had transformed into a wave. altering the company's culture in measurable ways. Naomi's phone buzzed, and she answered to hear Catherine Webb's voice on the line. "Dr. Ellis, I wanted to confirm that the legal documentation, witness statements, and procedural reviews have all been filed with the DOJ and the FAA. The outcome ensures that accountability is not only enforced, but institutionalized. Your action has set a clear standard for corporate compliance moving forward." "Thank you, Catherine," Naomi said, her tone even, yet with a rare softness. "But this is not the end. This is the beginning. The structures must be monitored, policies upheld, and vigilance maintained. Systems change slowly, but when the foundation is strong, the culture adapts accordingly." Greg Wallace, observing from a remote feed, typed notes rapidly. "Dr. Ellis," he said, his voice low, "this story is extraordinary. The scope from a single flight incident to systemic reform is remarkable. How do you maintain such composure through it all?" Naomi's gaze was reflective. "Composure comes from preparation, Greg. Understanding that actions have consequences, positive or negative, allows one to act deliberately. Fear or anger can derail even the most righteous cause. Calm allows for strategy, clarity, and ultimately, impact." Back at Origin Innovations, Naomi convened a team meeting to discuss the wider implications. "We've proven that moral courage can catalyze change, but we also need to leverage this lesson internally. Every executive, every employee, every team must understand that integrity is the bedrock of our work. Without it, achievements and innovation mean nothing." Maya nodded, visibly empowered. "Dr. Ellis, do you think this will inspire others beyond our company?" Naomi considered the question. "I believe it already has. Change doesn't announce itself. It spreads quietly through example. Today, someone, somewhere, is making a decision differently because they saw the impact of principled action. That ripple becomes a wave if sustained." Meanwhile, media coverage had begun to reflect the broader outcome. Aviation blogs, business analysts, and news outlets were reporting on the corporate consequences at Blue Star Airlines, emphasizing the systemic reforms and highlighting the proactive measures instituted. Naomi's role was noted, but the focus was on institutional change, accountability, and precedent. The narrative was no longer about a single confrontation, but about the mechanisms of justice within corporate systems. Back in Boston, Naomi and Maya walked through the office, observing interns and junior staff discussing protocols, ethics, and workplace accountability. The environment was vibrant with curiosity, questions, and a subtle sense of empowerment. Naomi understood that culture shifts not only through policy, but also through the daily consciousness of individuals who carry those principles forward. Later that evening, Naomi sat at her desk, reviewing proposals for new initiatives inspired by the incident. She considered a program that would integrate ethical accountability, conflict resolution, and inclusivity training for emerging corporate leaders. The idea was to institutionalize lessons learned, ensuring that no future executive, passenger, or employee would face the same systemic disregard. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Greg Wallace, who had been compiling a feature story. "The world is noticing. Your approach is being cited in leadership circles as a model for corporate responsibility." Naomi allowed herself a faint smile. Impact was measurable, but the work was ongoing, reflecting on the journey from that flight to systemic reform. Naomi thought of the small moments that had mattered most, the deliberate pressing of a call button, the careful documentation, the calm insistence on accountability, the courage shown by Maya Sanchez, the support from Captain Ethan Lewis, and the strategic precision of Catherine Webb. Each moment had compounded, building an irreversible trajectory of change. In the quiet of her office, Naomi drafted a message to Blue Star Airlines' leadership: systemic accountability is not an option. It is a responsibility. Every decision, every policy, every action contributes to a culture of integrity or its erosion. The choice is yours to sustain the change that has begun. She sent it, knowing that the ripple would continue, carried by the momentum already set in motion. As dusk settled over Boston, Naomi allowed herself a final reflection. The confrontation in first class had been a single act, but it had sparked an unprecedented corporate examination, inspired courage in a young attendant, forced accountability from leadership, and created systemic reform. Change had been catalyzed not by spectacle, not by anger, but by methodical, deliberate action grounded in integrity. Maya, standing nearby, asked softly, "Dr. Ellis, do you ever wonder if it was worth all the effort?" Naomi looked at her, serene. Every step was worth it. When integrity guides action and courage meets preparation, the outcomes are greater than any single person. What began as a stand for myself has become a standard for many. That is why it is always worth it. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the harbor, reflecting a world in motion. Naomi Ellis had transformed a moment of discrimination into a broader narrative of justice, accountability, and ethical reform. The legacy of the flight would resonate beyond corporate walls, serving as a reminder that calm determination, meticulous action, and principled courage could indeed reshape entrenched systems. And as she left the office that night, Naomi felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The battle was not over. It would never truly be, but the first victories had been secured, the precedent set, and the lesson clear: dignity, fairness, and integrity are forces capable of creating systemic change when wielded thoughtfully and relentlessly. The story of Dr. Naomi Ellis teaches us that integrity, courage, and calm persistence can create change far beyond a single moment. Life often places us in situations where we are overlooked, underestimated, or treated unfairly, and it can be tempting to stay silent. Yet, the choices we make, whether to stand up for ourselves, support others, or act with principled courage, shape not only our own lives but the systems around us. One of the most powerful lessons is that fairness and accountability are not passive concepts. They must be actively claimed. By documenting events, speaking truth, and remaining strategic rather than reactive, Naomi demonstrates that change does not require aggression, but clarity, preparation, and consistency. This story also reminds us of the ripple effect our actions can inspire courage in others, influence institutional practices, and leave lasting impact. For older audiences, this narrative reinforces that no matter one's stage in life, it is never too late to assert dignity, advocate for fairness, and create a legacy of ethical action. The story encourages reflection on personal responsibility, the importance of empathy, and the transformative power of standing firmly by one's principles. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If Naomi Ellis's story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every click helps us bring more real stories of courage, justice, and human resilience to life. Stand tall, speak your truth, and stay inspired.